Hello. Getting your mail. For today's video we're taking a look at and repairing a TAIR 300mm f4.5 M42 screw mount camera lens made in the USSR in the mid-1960s. This video is part 1 of 2. In part 2 we'll demonstrate the lens and see how it performs, but for now we'll take a look at the lens when it first arrived. So now we've skipped back in time a little bit to have a look at the lens as it was when it first arrived. And there are a few problems to be solved before I can use the lens. If I cock the aperture mechanism here and press the trigger release lever, it looks like it's working okay, but there is a problem, or at least a couple of problems with it. I'll put it back into the cocked position and then we'll have a look at the lens from the front. And if you look down at the aperture blades, they're not fully open. I can fully open them with the cocking lever, but its rest position is with the aperture blades partially closed. So it definitely looks like it's been taken apart at some time and put together incorrectly. And also, if I now trigger the aperture mechanism, you can see there's quite a lot of oil on those blades, so I think they'll need a clean. On top of that, you might not be able to see on this view, but there's a lot of fungus on the lens itself, so that'll need cleaning. And if I flip round to the rear end, you probably can't see from this view, but there's actually some cobwebs in the tube before you get down to the rear element, and there's plenty of muck on the rear element as well. It's fungus and muck and everything, so all the glass will need cleaning. And another little issue, again with the aperture mechanism, if I operate the focusing, you'll notice, or you might notice, as I go to the closer end, it releases the aperture locking mechanism, or at least it hasn't this time, but if I release that, it now won't recock. It's fallen off the locking pin and you can no longer recock it, so there's something wrong there. So I'll start off, I'll remove the aperture ring. I've had a look at this already, and the outer aperture ring just clamps onto an inner ring, so removing the outer one doesn't affect the mechanism, it just gives you a little bit of a better view. And that's held on with 3 little grub screws. One there, another one over here, and one over here. And then that simply pulls backwards, and that also removes this sleeve that goes round the aperture cocking mechanism lever thingamy-bob. And also at this stage I can take off the release lever and the actual mounting plate from the lens, and that simply comes off with 4 screws. It's quite nice, this lens, it's quite ruggedly built. It doesn't look like the most tricky thing in the world to work on. famous last words. It'll probably be a nightmare when I get to the aperture blades, but we'll see. And you can see as you remove this lever that it's actually spring loaded. There's a little spring just in here that keeps the end of the cocking lever held against the aperture mechanism until you press the lever. Next to come out is the main lens housing itself, and on the focusing ring there's a little limit screw just down here that stops it going beyond minimum focus. So if I remove that screw, I'll then be able to take it further than minimum focus and actually get the lens barrel or lens mechanism out. It takes a bit of a jiggle, but yeah, there we go. And right, yes, we have, let's see if we can get that in shot. No, I probably need a wider lens for this. But yeah, that's the main lens section out of the lens body. So if we have a quick look round the lens housing itself, you've got the focusing rack on the bottom there. This is the aperture ring system. You've got a set of springs, 3 springs that actually give the return tension to that, and this is the plate that the cocking release lever works on, and I suspect that might be installed incorrectly, but I'll have to see. And I'm guessing this is probably the part that the actual aperture ring itself works on. Right, a quick little update. The aperture cocking system is now working correctly. It cocks to the full position so the aperture is fully open, and it also works regardless of the position that the focusing is in. So if I just take the actual lens unit out again, I can show you what the problem was with that. And right, here we go. This little plate here, which is the one that the cocking lever presses against, had been fitted the wrong way round. If you look at this photo taken before I fixed it, the raised tab was over on this side. So that had been taken off and put the wrong way round. And also, as I suspected, this plate on the bottom was the wrong way round. So it had been put on with the longer flange over to the right rather than over to the left here. So yeah, someone had obviously had the lens apart and put it back together completely incorrectly. So that was a really simple fix, and that lot is now working correctly. So the next thing to do is to get the lens unit apart a bit more, to get the optics out for cleaning and have a look at the aperture blades. I think the first thing to come off will be this ring here, and this acts as the infinity end stop, so I'm guessing there must be some adjustment to it so they can tune the lens when they make them. So I'll put some marks, because I'm not sure if it just slides off or unscrews, so I'll put a mark to indicate where it is round the barrel, and a scratch at the back to show where it is up and down the barrel before I take that apart. Okay, I've put myself a couple of marks on the ring here and the barrel, so I can remove this flange part, and it looks like there are 3 small grub screws around the perimeter which should hopefully release it so I can undo it. So that's those slackened off. And yeah, pretty much as I thought. And of course I'm assuming that the infinity focus was correct as it was. That may have also been modified in the past, and it's not going to be difficult to retune the infinity if I need to, but it was worth marking it before I took this off. It's quite a simple lens compared to a normal focusing helicoid to work on with the focusing rack method. And there we have it. So looking round the front element, there appear to be some holes where there should be grub screws, and all those holes are vacant, so I suspect again someone's had the lens apart and lost some of the bits. But that's not really a problem. It's not like I'm going to be unscrewing the front element by mistake. So with a bit of luck, let's see if that'll come undone. I'm sure it will. There we go. We can unscrew the front element and then see what comes next. There we go, one front element out, and yeah, the glass is held in. Is that in shot? It's not really in shot. The glass is held in. It's got a lock ring, so I can just remove the glass from that and clean the fungus off it. There may be two elements in there, I'm not sure yet, but we'll see. So the next thing to come out, there's a spacer ring in here, and it looks like there's a little grub screw on the side to lock that in place, so we'll undo that, and then it should be a case of using the lens wrench to undo that spacer ring. So we'll see what we can do, see if I've got this in shot or in focus, and right, that's got it moving. And that is the spacer ring out. And it looks like there's some other spacing device. Whether this one will make all the Aperture blades fall out or not, I don't know. But this one I think is free to just lift out. And yep, there's that one, covered in grease like everything else in this lens. I quite like the way this lens smells more like a Russian tank than a bit of photography equipment. It's kind of nice, really. And I've just popped that spacer ring and the locking collar back in place because I noticed something else that was wrong. The spacer ring was installed the wrong way round. It's not actually being clamped by the locking collar, it's just free to float. So again, someone's had this apart and put it back together incorrectly. So yeah, well done to someone. Anyway, we'll get that put back the correct way when we reassemble it. Okay, it looks like there is another spacer ring in here, and again I suspect this one is also inserted the wrong way round. And whether these two spacer rings are in the correct order I don't know, because they've been put in incorrectly. So it looks like, starting from the front as it was, we'd got the locking ring, and then we'd got the larger of the two spacer rings, and then closest to the diaphragm was the smaller spacer ring. I'll put them back that way, just inverted so they're the correct way round, but whether that is the correct way or whether the smaller one should be the front of the pair, I don't know. But yeah, not a lot I can do about that unless I can find a diagram of one of these in pieces. But yeah, we'll proceed on to the next step now. Okay, I'm not quite sure how the next part of this is going to come apart. There are 3 grub screws around the perimeter that I'm guessing hold the aperture section in place. And it looks like there's a slipping connection, or a removable connection here between the drive, the spring drive for the aperture, and the actual aperture section. So whether it's a case of remove the stud from here and the 3 grub screws and withdraw the aperture section as a complete unit, or maybe if you do that all the blades will fall out. I'm guessing you probably don't need to remove the actual spring section, because it looks like that's completely independent and the only connection is this cut out drive here. So I'll have a look at that and see if I can work out how it comes apart. Right, I'm going to remove the rear element because it's got to come out sooner or later, and it looks like there's a little grub screw, see if we're in shot, yeah, that secures the lock ring for the rear element. So loosen that, and then we'll get the lens wrench in and just undo the lock ring with a bit of luck. Okay, that's free. I think I'll undo that the rest of the way with my fingers. Right, that's the rear lock ring out, and I'm going to try tipping the rear cluster of elements out into my hand and hope they don't come out in many pieces. I hope it's just one unit. So here goes. Okay, that's got it. And yeah, that's perfect. One rear cluster. Pop that down for later. Right, I'm kind of figuring that if I remove the pin that drives the aperture unit from here, I can then open the aperture unit up to its maximum aperture so the blades are all tucked into their unit, then remove the 3 perimeter grub screws and see how easy it is to then remove the aperture module, because I'm guessing it must come out as a module, because after all they had to assemble these lenses in the first place, so it must be possible to reverse that and take it apart. Okay, the aperture module did indeed just press out once I'd removed the drive pin and the grub screws, but as soon as I removed the drive pin from this side, the unit sort of split apart a bit and some of the blades popped out of position. It's not so much a problem at the moment because I'm going to be taking it apart, but for reassembly that could be quite interesting, how to keep the sandwich of the two parts together to hold the blades in while you insert it. But I guess I'll find that out in a while. The other thing that's a bit interesting, I might need to refocus for this, so hang on a second. As with everything else on this lens, you can see there's 2 sets of marks where the grub screws have been. The bigger mark looks like it was drilled through at the factory for the grub screw to sit in, so it's probably correct. The other mark, which is smaller, looks like it's been reassembled incorrectly at some point in time, so I'll have to try and get that right as well when I put it back together. But next is to actually take the aperture unit apart. So I'll reposition again and be back in a second. Okay, there's a second pin that doesn't drive the aperture mechanism, but it holds it together, and this is on the opposite side. The one that drove it was over on this side. So we'll remove this one, and then should be able to remove the drive section now. Let me think. No, I think I've got enough parts marked so I know what goes where. I've scribed a line on the side that was driving and the slot it goes into, just so I can put it back the same way round. It may not matter, but I will do it the same way anyway. So there's your drive part that drives the pins. Can you see that? Yes, you can. And in here are the aperture blades, which will want to come out, be cleaned and then reinserted correctly, which will probably be a lot of fun. But at least this lens is massive, so it shouldn't be too tricky. It's at this point in time I wish the lens only had about 6 aperture blades rather than the 16 that it does have, because this is going to take quite some time. But anyway, I shall carry on cleaning them with IPA and then reinsert them into the housing. Reinserting the blades into the housing is quite simple for the first ones until you get to the point that they start overlapping, and then you have to lift up the blade above to get the bottom pin into place, but we're still on the first ones at the moment, so it's quite easy. Well, predictably enough, that was quite tricky, and I didn't film the installation of the latter blades because basically I needed my head where the camera is, so all you'd have seen was the back of my head. But anyway, that is now the aperture assembly put back together and working. All I've got to do now is manage to fit it to the camera without making it come apart again. Okay, that wasn't too bad. I held the lens upside down and inserted the aperture module so it didn't all fall apart, and then got the grub screws in place before it fell apart, and now we have a working aperture, free of oil. It looks a bit scruffy. There's actually quite a lot of wear on the blades, but it is now clean, so that should do. So the next thing is in with the little inserts or spacers in the correct orientation. So the small one appears to be the first one, but it might not be, but that's how it was. I'll just put it in the correct way round, and that's that one in. And in with the second larger spacer, again the correct way round, so the narrow end is upwards facing the locking ring. So that's those two in, and then the locking ring goes in. If we can find the thread, get that screwed in, and then locked in place, and it's grub screw done up. And then I think I can get on with cleaning the optics. So now we can get the front element taken apart, see how many glass sections there are in there. So I'll get the lens wrench to undo the lock ring, and then unscrew that the rest of the way. And that's the lock ring out. And then let's have a look. How many glass elements are in here? It is 2 by the looks of it. That's the front, and a spacer and a rear. Right, okay. Let's get those cleaned. I use running warm water and washing up liquid to clean dirty lens elements, making sure my hands are free from grit before starting. Once clean and all the washing up liquid is thoroughly rinsed off, I'll dab the lens dry with kitchen towel, but not rub it, as the kitchen towel could be a bit abrasive. After washing the lens, I'll clean the inside of the lens housing with neat IPA, then clean the lens elements again before reinserting them. I've adopted a new technique recently, firstly cleaning the lens with IPA at about 70% strength, then follow this cleaning with distilled water, and finally buffing that dry with cotton buds, all of which are discarded after use. Well, actually they go in my used pile and will be reused on a piece of machinery such as one of my mechanical calculators. For a better demonstration of this cleaning process, head over to the Theoria Apophysis channel. I'll put a link to his demo in the description. Now to get the rear element out for cleaning. Often lens manufacturers use a lacquer of some kind to prevent parts from rattling loose. That's the case with the lock ring on this rear element, so I'm putting some drops of IPA onto the lacquer to soften it slightly before undoing the lock ring. Hopefully the lacquer will now be soft enough so I can get the lock ring undone with the lens wrench. And there it goes. As usual, I'll unscrew it the rest of the way using the tip of a screwdriver. And that's the lock ring off. Now for the lens itself. And there we go, one rear element ready for cleaning. Right, that's the rear elements back in. It was a little bit tricky getting the lock ring back in because it's such a recess down to the thread that, yeah, that was a little fiddly. But now we've just got the front elements to go back in. And having done the work on the lens, it's quite clear that the front element is a little bit scratched on the outside, but it's not too bad. You may have noticed at this stage that in my haste I didn't clean one surface of the front element group very well, so I had to take it apart again and do the job properly after I'd filmed this clip. Okay, that's most of the lens back together. I've just got the infinity setting ring to screw back on, and I'll put it back onto my original marks and find out later if that is actually in the right place. and onto the mark. And then there's just the 3 grub screws to do up round that collar. And I've put a smear of grease on the focusing surfaces of the actual barrel itself, so we can now hopefully assemble it. You need the aperture set at f22 to assemble one of these, and line up the focusing rack, and then insert the lens. And you also need to hold the aperture trigger section out of the way, and then it's kind of difficult to do with the camera in the way, but let's see how we get on. And nearly there. Okay, let's see, have I got that in the right spot? Right, I'll need to just move it 1 notch to get the rack into the right place. Excellent, that's where we were, so it's sitting at infinity. And right, all I need to do is put the end stop limit screw back in here, and then I can try the lens out. This video has dragged on for considerably longer than intended, so I'll leave the demonstration and test for part 2, which should follow in about a week's time. I'll put a link to that video in the description when it's available. If you've enjoyed watching, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. There'll be plenty more vintage stuff coming soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.